नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा संबुद्धस्स। So today we will be looking at the last part of the book 6 of the Buddha's Dhamma, and this part is about the friends and admirers. So this deals part 4 deals with friends and admirers of the Buddha, and this part becomes important in the light of the book 6, because the book 6 is about who was about his enemies, about his friends, about the doctrine or the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. And here we have the about his friends and admirers. So we have seen the part 1 was about benefactors, part 2 was about his enemies, and part 3 about critics of his doctrines. And today we will be begin to study part 4, which is about his friends and admirers. So when we look at the friends and admirers of the part 4 of the book 6, Dr. Ambedkar has divided into 6 subparts, and these 6 subparts are something about how the people were devoted to the Buddha, how the people were devoted to the Buddha's teachings. And this becomes very significant for us to understand, how much faith we should have in the blessed Lord, the Buddha, and the importance of faith in the Buddha. So the subpart 1 begins with the heading, Devotion of Dhananjani, a Brahmini. So there was a Brahmini named Dhananjani, and this is about her devotion to the Buddha. So I'm not going to read through the entire story, but what I'm going to do is talk about some of the points. So the blessed Lord had many admirers and friends, and we know that there were many friends of the Buddha, because Buddha was such a profound human being that once you get in contact with the Buddha, you came in contact with something which is, highly evolved human being, or highly developed human being, or a human being to the core. And anybody who came in contact with the Buddha was influenced by the Buddha's being and Buddha's presence and Buddha's existence. And of course, the Buddha had many friends and admirers. So Baba Ambedkar had selected a few of them in order to tell us about their love for the Buddha. So Dhananjani was one of them, and she was a wife of a Brahmin named Bhardwaj, and Bhardwaj was very anti-Buddha and very anti-Dhamma and very anti-Sangha. He didn't approve Dhananjani's admiration for the Buddha. And as the story goes, the Buddha was staying in Rajagriha, and she was the resident of Rajagriha, and she had this fond of expressing her devotion to the Buddha. And as Baba Ambedkar says in the verse number 2, her devotion is worthy of mention. So in Buddhism, whenever we talk about Buddhism, we talk about the rationality and so on and so forth. Of course, it's the heart of Buddhism, but at the same time, there is a tremendous place for the devotion to the Buddha. And as the story goes, that the Buddha was staying in Veruvan, bamboo grew, and this Bhardwaj family offered a feast to the other Brahmins, and but the husband knew that she will be singing the songs of praise of the Buddha, and therefore he admonished his wife that please do not do so, and if you do so, he will slice her like a plantain with his dagger. So he said, if you dare to sing the song of the Buddha in praise of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, I will slice you like the the banana tree is sliced with his dagger, he said. But Dhananjani was so much in awe and devoted to the Buddha, she said that she is ready to suffer anything. And so she retained her freedom of speech. You see, this is very important. The freedom of speech is very important. So she said that you are threatening me that if I talk about the Buddha, you will slice me with your dagger. But I'm not afraid. I'm going to do whatever I want. I am not going to renounce my freedom of speech. I'm going to retain my freedom of speech. That's what Dhananjanani said. And she proceeded to pour forth 500 verses on her theme so that he surrendered unconditionally. So you see what she prepared about 500 verses to praise the Buddha and whatever her theme of the Dhamma was. And then there was a feast. A feast was laid down. The guest came, sat down to take their food. And while serving the guest, the dominant impulse arose in her. So she was serving the guest, and the dominant impulse arose in the heart of the Dhananjanani. And she started uttering the phrases of the triple gem, Triratna. She started, singing, praising the Triratna. So the guests were, of course, scandalized because they didn't like the Buddha, and they spitted out their food, and they said that it's defiled. The food is defiled in the presence of a heretic, and the husband scolded her amid the ruins of his feast. So she was scolded by her husband for singing the glory to the exalted one, the Arhat, the Buddha, supreme, glory to the norm, glory to the order. So she continued to sing the glory of the Buddha. And when she had so said, the Bharadwaja Brahmin grew very angry, and he says, "You are a wretch. Must you be singing the praises of that shaveling friar?" See, shaveling means a bald, tonsured-headed man. You are singing the praises of that shaveling friar at any and every opportunity. Now, wretch, will I give that teacher of thine the peace of mind. She said, I will go and give your teacher the peace of mind. So he's listening to this. Dhananjanani thought that nobody in the world utters such kind of words for the Buddha, because the Buddha is the enlightened one. He is the one, and nobody utters such kinds of words to him. So she says to her husband, Bharadwaj, you go and meet him, and you will know who the Buddha is. So likewise, the Bharadwaja, he is vexed and displeased. He goes to the Buddha and he salutes him, and he sits on one side and he asks the Buddha this. So seated, he asked the exalted one the following questions. Now, these are the questions of Bharadwaj to Buddha. What must we slay if we would happy live? What must we slay if we could weep no more? What is above all other things whereof the slaughter thou approved, Gautama? So he asked, see, these arrogant people used to address Buddha as Gautama, not as the Buddha or Tathagata. So he asked the Buddha question, what must we slay? What must we kill if we would happy live? What must we slay if we could weep no more? What is above all other things whereof the slaughter thou approved, Gautama? And then the exalted one replied as follows. Wrath must a slay. Wrath means anger, krodh. Krodh you must slay. Wrath must you slay if you would live, if you would happily live. So if anybody would like to live happily, the thing that they need to kill is the anger. So slaying down the anger is what the Tathagata is teaching. Of anger, Brahmin, with its poisoned source and favored climax, murderously sweet. That is the slaughter by the Aryans praised. That must ye slay in sooth to weep no more. See, the anger is it has a poisoned source and favored climax, isn't it? If we are ever angry, and if there is an anger in our heart bubbling up all the time, we know what happens at the end of it. And it's murderously sweet. It's that this anger has a quality of producing some kind of a murderous sweetness. And that is what we need to kill. We need to kill the feeling of killing others. We need to destroy the feeling of destroying other people. In other words, we have to destroy the anger. That's what the Buddha says. And once if we destroy, if we kill the anger, what happens? We are happy. We would live a happy life. We would not weep anymore. So this is what the Buddha taught. The anger has such a power on the human beings. It can make our lives a hell. It can make our lives completely, sorrowful, full of sorrow. So the anger has this kind of a power, this kind of a potential to disrupt our life altogether. So of course, he was very angry, he was very furious, and we know that the Buddha is a master teacher, so he's teaching him exactly what he needs to be taught. And the Buddha is telling him that, if you want to be angry, please, you destroy your anger, you destroy your growth, you destroy your wrath. So now, having heard these words of the Buddha, he understood, Bhardwaj had understood, and he said, most excellent Lord, most excellent. So he's praising the teaching of the Buddha. He's saying that it's a most excellent teaching. Just as if a man were to set up that which had been thrown down, or were to reveal that which was hidden away, or were to point out the right road to him who had gone astray, or were to bring a lamp into darkness, so that those who had eyes could see external objects. Even so, Lord, has the Lord Gautama shown me his doctrine in various ways. Even I, he says, see, it's very emphatic. He says, even I, betake myself to the exalted one as my refuge, to the norm and to the order. I would leave the world under the rule of Gautama. I would take orders. So Dhananjanani was not only a devotee of the Buddha, she made her husband also a devotee of the Buddha. So you see, this is what has the power. The devotion has the power to drive us towards something higher. But it's not just us that our devotion has the power to carry forth, but people around us get affected by our devotion to something higher. And that is what the story of the Dhananjanani reveals to us. The sub-part 2 is about Vishaka. She's also known as Migara Mata, and she's a very famous in Buddhist history as somebody who was a great benefactor of the Buddhist Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. And we have seen in the past classes her stories of giving away dana, and she was an equivalent of Anathapindaka in terms of giving away. And here also, Baba Sahib Ambedkar is giving up the story of faith of Vishaka. And Vishaka's story is very famous. I'm not going to go into depth, but as a child, she was, influenced by the Buddha. She was a Buddhist, even when she was a child, and she was very beautiful. She was very wise. So she was married in a very rich family in Kosambi, and the name of her husband was Punnavadhan. And her father-in-law was very rich man, but he was not fond of Buddha, and he was fond of the Jainas. He was fond of the Niganthas, and he didn't like the Vishaka's devotion to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, and he would always find a way to not to let Vishaka praise the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. But Vishaka had already surrender her life, her heart to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. She was such a devoted to the Buddha and the Dhamma. She had taken refuge in the Buddha and the Dhamma. So she was not swaying away, and there were a lot of issues at her home because of this, because her father-in-law was the devotee of Niganthas, and she was the devotee of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. And so as the story goes, one day Migara, her father-in-law, was eating food, and while Vishaka stood fanning him, a monk was seen standing outside the house. So this was a Buddhist practice of monk going from door to door, but the monk won't ask for the food; they will stand in silence. So the monk was standing in silence, and he was expecting some food from them. And contrary to the popular opinion that the Buddhist monks used to beg, they never begged for food. They just stood there. And if you want to give them, you give them. Otherwise, they will just pass by. They will go to the next house. And if they don't get even enough food, they will just, stay hungry. So, the monk was standing outside with his bowl, and he was silent. So Vishaka stood aside that Migara might see him. So seeing that there is a monk at the door, she stood aside so that Migara can see the monk. But the Migara continued to eat without noticing the monk. But the Migara continued to take his food. He looked at the monk, but he did not pay any attention to the monk. Seeing this, Vishaka said to the monk, very nicely, she said to the monk, "Pass on, sir. My father-in-law eats stale fare. He is eating the stale fare. The food is not good for you." Migara was angry and threatened to send her away. If you say like this, I will send you away to your parental home. But at her request, the matter was referred. But at her request, the matter was referred to her sponsors. They inquired into several charges brought against her and adjudged her not guilty. She was not guilty on any count. The way her father-in-law used to complain about her, but she was not guilty on any count. So Vishaka then gave orders that preparation be made for her return to her parents. Both Migara and his wife begged for forgiveness, which she granted, on condition that he would invite to the house the Buddha and his monks. She said, "Okay, I will stay. I'll stay back, but on one condition. You would invite yourself to the Buddha and his Sangha for taking their meals at a home." So this he did, but owing to the influence of the Nigantas, he left Vishaka to entertain them and only consented to hear the Buddha sermon at the end of the meal from behind a curtain. So he said, "I'm not going to go to the Buddha, and I'm going to, stand behind the curtain and you serve him. I'm going to listen to his Dhamma talk only when, listening from behind the curtain." So he was, however, so convinced by the sermon that he became a convert. So when he heard the Buddha taught, he couldn't resist himself by not surrendering himself to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, and he became the follower of the Buddha. And his gratitude towards Vishaka was boundless. You see, because he was introduced to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha by Vishaka, his gratitude towards her was boundless. And because of that gratitude towards her, he considered her to be his mother, deserving all the honors due to a mother. So she said that because you introduced me to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, henceforth you are like my mother, because you have taken care of me just like a mother would take care of her child. So henceforth I would consider you my mother, and I would give you all the honors due to a mother. From this time onwards, she was called Migara Mata. So Vishaka, as I told you in the beginning, was also called Migara Mata. So from this time onwards, she was also known in the history as Migara Mata, the mother of Migara. Such was abiding faith of Vishaka. That was the faith of Vishaka. Even the family members, her father-in-law was against the Buddha, but she withstood, and she never surrendered. She only surrendered to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. Now the third subpart is about the story of Mallika, and Mallika was the queen, and she was the wife of the famous king of the time. And her husband was Prasannajit, and there are some of the stories related to Prasannajit and the Buddha, but this is a very interesting story about Mallika. And there was a rumor in the town Shravasti, when one person went to meet the Buddha because his son had died, and he went to meet the Buddha, and his father neglected his business and his mill, and he was always going to the charnel ground and wailing aloud, saying, "Where are you, my son? Where are you?" Because his only son was gone, and he was crying every time going to the cemetery in front of his son's burial ground, and he used to cry loudly there. So the bereaved father came to the blessed Lord, and after due salutation sat on one side. Seeing that his mind was absolutely vacant, showing no interest in anything, not telling the purpose for which he had come, the blessed Lord, noticing his condition, said, "You are not yourself. Your mind is all awry. Your mind has gone astray. You are not yourself." The bereaved father, To the bereaved father, the Buddha said, "You are not yourself. Your mind is all awry. Your mind is gone astray. You are not yourself. How could my mind not be awry, sir, when I have lost my darling and only son?" You say it's but natural for a father to feel such a sadness. "Yes, householder, our dear ones bring sorrow and lamentation. pain, suffering, and tribulation. So this is what the Lord said. Instead of counseling him, the Buddha said to him that, this is how it is. What is it like? The Buddha said, yes, householder, our dear ones bring sorrow and lamentation, pain, suffering, and tribulation. Who, sir, can entertain such a view? Said the angry householder. Nay, our dear ones are a joy and happiness to us. So this is what was the view of the person who was coming to the Buddha. He was saying that, this is not his view. Our dear ones give the joy and pleasure. So he departed and he started telling everybody, to the gamblers, he met on the way, the gamblers, and he told the story. And they said, what is this? Whatever the recluse Gautama is saying is not good. It's not true, because the source of our joy are our dear ones. And then the rumor spread in the town. It's reached up to Mallika, and it's reached up to the king, that the Tathagata holds such kind of view that our near and dear ones gives us sorrow, lamentation, pain, suffering, and tribulation. So Mallika was, of course, devoted to the Buddha, and her husband said that what kind of teacher Buddha is, he's spreading such kind of a thing. So the queen told one of her servants to go to the Buddha and in her name ask him what is the true story behind this rumor that the Buddha is teaching like this. And she said, be careful to tell me exactly what the Lord answers. So in the obedience to the queen's command, the Brahmin, her servant, went off and duly asked the Lord whether he had really said so. So the Buddha said, yes, our dear ones do bring sorrow and lamentation, pain, suffering, and tribulation. Here is the proof. And the Buddha is giving the proof that how our dear ones do bring sorrow, lamentation, pain, suffering, and tribulation. So the Buddha is giving the proof. Once here in Shravasti, a woman's mother died, and the daughter, crazed and beside herself, went about from street to street, from crossroad to crossroad, saying, have you seen my mother? Have you seen my mother? Another proof is a woman of Shravasti who lost a father, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a husband, crazed and beside herself. The women went about from street to street and from crossroad to crossroad, asking if anyone had seen the dear ones she had lost. Another proof is a man of Shravasti who lost his mother, his father, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a wife, crazed and beside himself. The man went about from street to street and from crossroad to crossroad, asking if anyone had seen the dear ones he had lost. Another proof is that the women of Shravasti who visited her people's home and they wanted to take her from her husband and marry her to someone else whom she did not like, she told her husband about it, whereupon he cut her into two and then killed himself so that they might both die together. All this the Brahmin Nalidhan duly reported to queen. The queen then went to the king and asked, are you fond, sir, of your only daughter, the princess Vajira? Yes, I am, replied the king. There is on the birth of the king, Princess Vajira. Prasenajit was sitting with the Buddha, and the news came, and Prasenajit was sad, and the Buddha asked why you are sad. He said, a baby girl is delivered at my home, and the Buddha told, you don't need to be sad, because the girl child might be better than even a male child. So she's Vajira here, and Queen Mallika is asking her husband, are you fond, sir, of your only daughter, the Princess Vajira? Yes, I am, replied the king. If anything happened to your Vajira, would you feel sorry or not? If anything happens to her, it would make a great difference to my life. Are you fond, sir, of me? Asked Mallika. Yes, I am. If anything happened to me, would you feel sorry or would you not? If anything happened to you, it would make a great difference to my life. Are you fond, sir, of the people of Kasi and Kosala? Yes, replied the king. If anything happened to them, would you be sorry or not? If anything happened to them, it would make great difference. How could it be otherwise? Did the blessed Lord say anything different? No, Mallika, said the king in repentance. So that's what the Buddha taught. So this overwhelming attachment vis-a-vis what we can say the metta, undue attachment to even our near and dear ones. blinding ourselves to the reality of the nature of the world. And if we attach so much to something, it bound to lead us to astray. So Buddha is not against metta. You know that the family has to be mettaful, but undue neurotic, psychotic attachment to anything leads to a lot of suffering. So three remaining sections, and I'm going to cover them today. So this is a subpart 4, and it's the story of a pregnant mother. So this is a very beautiful story, and the story goes like this: that there was a prince who wanted to see the Buddha, and he invited the Buddha to his home, and he laid out a white carpet in the honor of the Buddha. The Buddha declined to walk on the carpet. So Buddha was he was a very profound human being. He didn't like any special accord. He didn't like any special things done to him. He was a human being and liked to be treated like a human being. So having said this, this prince invited the Buddha to his home, and the Buddha went to his home to take his food, and after having taken his food, the prince served the food with his own hands and without a stint to the Lord and co-fraternity to Sangha. The Lord's meal over and done, Prince Bodhi. The name of the prince is very beautiful, Prince Bodhi. So you see the name. Now keep the name in your mind, because this is very important to understand the story of this prince. So the Prince Bodhi, sitting himself on a low seat to one side, said to the Lord, "My view, sir, is that true will must be sought not through things pleasant, but through things unpleasant. So if you want to earn the true wealth, the road to the true wealth goes through the unpleasant things, not through the pleasant things." That's the question that the comment that Prince Bodhi made. And the verse number 14 is very interesting, because now I think the Buddha is advanced in his age. So this is what the Buddha told, and I'm going to read this verse number 14. "In days gone by, Prince, said the Blessed One, I too held the same view in the days before my enlightenment. Time was when being quite young, that time I was very young, with a wealth of coal black hair, and in all the beauty of my early prime, despite the wishes of my parents who wept and lamented. I cut off hair and beard, donned the yellow robe, and went forth from home to homelessness as a pilgrim. A pilgrim now in quest of the good and in search for the road to that utter peace which is beyond all compare. Now I hold a different view. So after having traveled on the road of, the metaphorical road of the physical world and the spiritual world, this is what the Buddha says. Now I hold a different view. The Buddha says, now I hold a different view. What kind of a view? If a man knows the doctrine, he will find the destruction of all ills. You see, in single sentence, the Buddha, teaches the truth of his life. What is the truth? What is the view that the Buddha had? If a man knows the doctrine, the Dhamma, if the man knows the Dhamma, he will find the destruction of all ills. All the suffering will vanish. Provided if we know the Dhamma. You see, with very pithy words. If a man knows the Dhamma, he will find the destruction of all ills. So if we know the Buddha's teachings, if we know Buddha's Dhamma, if we know Buddha's path, we will find the destruction of all ills, all suffering, all dukkha. Said the prince to the Lord. Now this is what the prince said to the Lord. What a doctrine, what an exposition of doctrine. It is so easy to understand. So here the young Brahmin Sankika Putta observed to the prince that though he had testified thus, he has praised the Buddha's teaching, he has not gone to say that he sought as a refuge the Lord and his doctrine and his co-fraternity as he should have. So, of course, we know that at the end of the Buddha's teachings, the people used to take their refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. But here it doesn't happen like that. It didn't happen like that. He praised the Buddha's teaching. He praised the Buddha's Dhamma. But he didn't take the refuge in the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha. And looking at this, his friend said to him that you have not taken your refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. So Prince Bodhi says, and very beautiful, say not so, my friend, say not so, said Prince, for I have heard from the lips of my lady mother how when once the Lord was staying at Kosambi in the Gosita Pleasant, she being then pregnant came to the Lord, saluted him and took sight to one side, saying, be it a boy or be it a girl that I carry in my womb, my child unborn seeks a refuge with the Lord and his doctrine and his co-fraternity. And I asked the Lord to accept the child as a follower who had found an abiding refuge from this time forth for while life lost. You see this devotion of a mother, his mother, even he was not born, she was pregnant with him. She goes to the Buddha. She says that accept my child as your follower. So he remembers that. He says, don't say that I have not taken refuge. My mother, when she was pregnant, she has already done it. And another time when the Lord was staying here in the Bhag country at Sumsumara Gira, in the Bheskala Grua, in the deer park, there my nurse carried me to the Lord. My nurse carried me to the Lord. And standing before him said, here is Prince Bodhi, who seeks refuge and with the Lord and his doctrine as his co-fraternity. Now in person for the third time. Now he says that now I'm grown up. Now in person for the third time, I seek such refuge and ask the Lord to accept me as a follower who has found an abiding refuge while life lost. You see, till our life lost, the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, they are the ultimate refuge. And third time in his person, the Prince Bodhi has taken the refuge. Very moving story. His mother has already, surrendered him to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. Then his nurse, when he was a child, has taken him to the Buddha. And he says, this is the third time in person, I am taking my refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. So, the fifth subpart about Kenya, and there was a Brahmin named Sela who was very well versed in the text of the time, and there was a Kenya, the fire worshipper or Zoroastrian, whatever, was an adherent of this Brahmin Sela. So accompanied by his 300 people, Sela went and saw all the fire worshippers there busy with their several tasks, with Kenya himself marking off the reserved circles. At the sight of this, the Brahmin said to Kenya, what is it all for? What is all this? Is it a wedding feast? Or is there a great sacrifice afoot? Or have you invited a repast tomorrow, Senior Bimbisar, king of Magadha, with all his host? So Kenya was preparing for, a feast, and a lot of people were involved in making the arrangements. And the Brahmin Sela asked this question to Kenya, what is all this? Is it a wedding feast? Or is there a great sacrifice of food? Or have you invited to a repast tomorrow Senior Bimbisar, king of Magadha, with all his host? It is no wedding feast, Sela, nor is the king coming with all his host. But I have got a great sacrifice of food. For the recluse Gautama has arrived at Apana in the course of an alms pilgrimage with 1,250 almsmen in his train. Now such, according to report, is the high repute of this Gautama, that he is deemed to be the Lord of Enlightenment. The Buddha is the Lord of Enlightenment. He is the King of Enlightenment. It is he whom I have invited tomorrow's meal here, together with his co-fraternity. The feast that is being prepared is for him. Did you attribute to him enlightenment, Kenya? Asked Sela. Yes, I did, replied Kenya. And he said, did you? Yes, I did. You see, such was the devotion, of the people to the Buddha. They arranged big feast, big festivities for the Buddhas. Though Buddha didn't like it, but it was a tradition of the Buddhist Sangha to partake their meals from the other people. Now, the last part of the book 6 is subpart is 6, Prasennajit in praise of the master. So we have already seen Prasennajit's love for the Buddha, his queen's love for the Buddha, and here in this last part, we will look at how Prasennajit praised the master, the Buddha. Worth listening to this story. Once the exalted one was staying near Shravasti at Jeta's Guru in Anathapindika's park. Now at the time, the Raja of Kosala, Prasennadi, had just returned from a sham fight in which he was victorious, having carried out his object. And on reaching the park, he turned in that way. So far as the cart road went, he rode in his chariot and then got down and went on foot through the park. On that occasion, a number of brethren were walking up and down in the open air. Then Pasinadi, the Raja of Kosala, went up to those brethren and thus accosted them. Reverend sirs, where now is the exalted one staying, that Arhant, Buddha Supreme? For I long to behold him. I want to see him. Where is that Buddha Supreme? I want to behold him. I want to see him. Yonder Maharaja is his longing. And the door is shut. The Buddha is in his room. The door is shut. Do you go up quietly without nervousness? Don't be nervous. Go there quietly, but don't be nervous. Enter the veranda, cough, like that cough, and rattle the door bar. There is a door bar, you just rattle it. The exalted one will open the door to you. Very symbolic, you see, it's very symbolic. When you call, the Buddha comes. So Pasanadi, the Raja of Kosala, went up to the lodging as he was told, cuffed and rattled the door bar, and the exalted one opened the door. Then Pasanadi entered the lodging, fell with his head at the feet of the exalted one. He fell at the feet of the exalted one, kissed his feet and stroked them with his hands. You see, he kissed the Buddha's feet and stroked them with his hands and announced his name, saying, Lord, I am Pasinadi, the Raja of Kosala. You see, the Raja of Kosala, throwing himself at the Buddha, kissing his feet and caressing his feet. You see the devotion of the Prasanajit. And he's saying that I am the king, I am the Raja of Kosala, I am the most powerful man here, surrendering to you. But Maharaja, seeing that significance therein, do you show me this profound humanity and pay such affectionate obeisance to this body, said the Lord. So he said that, you show me this profound humanity. There's a profound humility in you. There is a profound humanity in you. And you are paying, this affectionate obeisance to this body of the Buddha. Is that it? So the Buddha, of course, has reciprocated his acceptance of his respect. But we know that the Buddha preferred not just respecting his body, but, he's teaching the Dhamma, because the Buddha was nothing but the Dhamma. And we know that on several occasions, the Buddha has taught Prasanajit about the teachings and about the Dhamma. So I think with this, we finish the book 6. So far, we have covered the book 6 of the Buddha and Dhamma. And the next class onwards, we will be starting off with the book number 7, all the way up to book number 8. And then we will be concluding our studies of the Buddha and Dhamma. But there is a long way to go. We still have 2 books to study. So I will stop here, but we can imagine that how the Buddha had fascinated the humanity. Even today, we are in such a awe of the Buddha. Even if we see his rupa, where even when we see his representation of a stupa, if we hear his teachings, if we hear somebody talking about the Buddha's Dhamma, our hearts are delighted. Our hearts are, lifted up. And, such was the Buddha. So we can imagine when the Buddha was alive, how much people would have loved him, how much people would have admired him, how much people would have fallen in his feet and kissed his feet and caressed his feet. So you see, with this profound teacher, the Buddha was, all the time, if we keep on remembering the Buddha, thinking about the Buddha, it brings something to our lives. It brings that power of the enlightened human being into our lives, in terms of his remembrance, in terms of his memory. So I will stop here, and I will, these are just stories, but beautiful stories. They teach us a lot. And, I will stop here and open up the class if there are any comments, anything to discuss. Anything from anyone? I don't think there is much to discuss on this thing, but we can learn from the stories how important the devotion is towards the Buddha, because the devotion makes us, open to learn about the Buddha, open to learn about teachings. And the devotion has a tremendous value. It is called Saddha in Buddhism. And when the Saddha is directed upwards, the Maitri or Metta is directed upwards towards the Buddha, it becomes the Shraddha. So I would reckon that we have so much to learn from this book number 6. And as I say often in the class, it's our duty to study the Buddha and his Dhamma again and again, 1 page, 2 pages every time, so that we can derive more light of it, light from the Buddha and his Dhamma, and live our lives according to that light. So if there is nothing to share, nothing to comment, Sunil Bhav, Pankaj ji, Rahul, Vidyanand, Dipti, anything, anybody has anything to say?
No, sir, no.
Okay. So we will end our class here today and see you in the next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Namo Buddhaya.